By a grant from the George S. and Dolores Dore Eccles Foundation, proud to support the worldwide effort to bring families together. And by ancestralquest.com, helping families find their lost ancestors for over 50 years. ancestralquest.com.
Welcome to Ancestors. I'm your host, Scott Wilkinson. Computers and genealogy were made for each other. Advancements in technology are making records more accessible than ever. And computers really can help you gather, organize, and share information in ways your ancestors would never have dreamed.
It is a tool that you don't have to be afraid of. The elderly love it because they used to do it all the hard way before, and now they've got something that can synthesize, organize, and spit out information in book form without you having to add anything else. It's an absolute boon to genealogists.
Megan Smolenyak from Vienna, Virginia, grew up doing genealogy. But her biggest breakthroughs have come in recent years as she has used computers to connect with living relatives as well as ancestors on both sides of the Atlantic.
I got into genealogy in the 6th grade as a result of a homework assignment. Our teacher, Mrs. Berkowitz, had us go home one night and find out where our surnames came from. And we went back to school the next day, and she had a big old map of the world up on the wall. And we each had to put our names on these little slips of paper and put it up on the map in our country of origin. And I remember actually feeling sorry for most of my classmates because virtually all of them were all crowded around the British Isles, whereas I had the whole of the Soviet Union to myself. And I didn't know exactly what that meant, but it seemed to suggest that there was something different about my family, and it was enough to pique my curiosity and get me started. So from that point on, I started writing letters, talking to my older relatives, and just saving up my allowance to buy the next death certificate, that kind of thing. I was a real wild child, as you can see. I went with my grandparents up to Wilkes-Barre, which is where they're from. And we were driving through Pennsylvania from New Jersey, and along the way, we passed a big old sign that said Smoleniak's Garage or Body Shop, something like this. And I remember asking my grandparents about it, but they just dismissed it. So we went on our merry way, and I never thought more about it, but that memory sort of lingered. And it was probably only about 5 years after that that I got into genealogy, and I started doing research. And I did all this research, but all I could ever find evidence of was my own great-grandfather, Peter Smolenyak. He came from this village called Osturna, which in those days, this was about 1890. It was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and today is Slovakia. He came to the United States, married a woman named Karolina Motitska, and they had 11 children. And their youngest son was a fellow by the name of George, who became ultimately my grandfather. George married to a Mary Sidurko, and one of their 2 boys was also named George, and that's my dad. It got to the point over the years where I started to think I had made this up. This idea of having seen this sign up on the wall. I thought, geez, maybe I just invented this. But on the other hand, every time I was just about to accept it as fact that we were the only ones that ever came, that dusty memory would kind of come up there going, no, there's more of you out there. Just keep on looking.
In searching for your ancestors, don't think of computers as intimidating machines designed to frustrate you. In fact, computers and the programs they run make nearly every aspect of research easier. And while they can't scroll through microfilm for you, they can store your information so that you can instantly have it printed out as pedigree charts, family group sheets, descendancy charts, and many other formats.
Traditionally, when you were working with your genealogical research, you had a lot of handwritten notes, you had a lot of a lot of handwritten charts and things that you'd end up erasing and penciling back in or scribbling out, and you had things that weren't always all that neat and tidy. Sometimes having to remember where things were, if you had your records kept on index cards or in 12 or 20 three-ring binders, you'd have to try to remember which binder to go pull to look up a specific family. And now with genealogy software programs and databases, you know, they have a search function. You can go in and search on a specific name and boom, there's your information on that individual.
Computers are easier and easier to use. When I first got online, it was a little intimidating to me. But now I find it very easy to use, and the programs that you use are very simple, and it's not much of anywhere near the problem it was or the challenge it was, say, 10 years ago.
You really just need a computer and a monitor and some software, some lineage-linked software, so that you can start putting in yourself and your parents and your grandparents and the software. There's lots of different software available today, and they all do the basic same thing, which is linking one person to another.
I treated myself to some software, and that was a real blessing, because I was able to take these stacks of papers that had accumulated and put all the information into a computer that would keep it all straight for me. For example, now my database has about 3,300 people in it, and by the way, that's not a large database. There's plenty of people out there with much larger ones, and you can imagine just trying to keep 3,300 people straight in your head, or on paper even. It's just becomes almost too discouraging to even try. So now what's happened is I have the luxury of spending most of my time doing research, the detective work, which is the most fun part of genealogy, and I can spend just a minimal part of my time on the record keeping and citing the sources and so forth, so future generations can track back to where I got my information from. But having said that, I was still stuck on this roadblock. I still wasn't finding anything else on Smoleniaks out there, so I was still dead-ended. So fortunately for me, right about this time, along comes the internet as well.
Computers help you manage the information you put into them, but the internet allows your computer to access staggering amounts of new information, and even allows you to connect with other people, sending and receiving electronic messages called email.
It's a global library of information, a vast library that's constantly changing and constantly growing. Websites are the books in that library, and websites again are made up of several web pages, and there are millions of websites all across the internet. And the websites connect to one another through links, and as they link from one to another, after a while you've got this web of websites.
One of the great resources on the internet is the online database, an electronic repository of information you can easily search through to obtain what you're looking for. For example, the Social Security Death Index is an online database, which means you can access the names in this index right from your computer.
One of the first databases that became available online is what's called the SSDI, or the Social Security Death Index, and this one was just a real find for somebody of my sort of ethnic heritage. The SSDI is essentially a database of most, not all, but most of the people who've died in the United States since about 1967 or so to the present, because when it finally became available online, I went and searched, of course, on my own name, Smolenyak. It's the first thing you do. And I got, I'd say about 15 hits. And so I started going through it. Okay, that's my grandfather, that's my great-uncle, that's his wife, so forth. But then I got to a couple of names I couldn't account for. I said, who's this Martha Smolenyak?
The internet is like an enormous library with millions of books. But because there are no shelves online, the vast databases are in no particular order. So how do you find the one book that you need? Well, the answer is a search engine. It's like an electronic card catalog that helps you narrow your search and find the information you need among the internet's huge selection of electronic books.
A search engine is a program that looks for the content that you input. So if you input something, it goes and looks for that word or that phrase in a database.
To go use a search engine, you would put in a keyword like genealogy or Virginia genealogy. So if you're looking for something specific, maybe a surname, you might want to try a group of words, Smith, Virginia genealogy. And you put these things in the search engine form, you hit enter, and you will get back a set of results. And the set of results is, these are the various things we had in our index database that might match what you're looking for.
If you wanted to search for your family specifically, there are some times when you would search just by surname. So you would type in a surname and it would return websites that have that surname on it. Other times you'd put in a complete name, a complete ancestor's name, first and last name, and it would pull back websites that mention that name. Depending on how common the name is, the site can be very useful. If you're looking for the name Smith, it's not going to be too useful because you're going to get hundreds of thousands of websites and it's too many to look at. Whereas if you put in a name like Elisha Smith, then if it came back with 100 websites, you could then look at each of those websites that mention an Elisha Smith, and probably one or more of them might contain some information about your ancestor.
I put in a last name to do a surname search, kept feeding it some keywords and some information, and within a half an hour I had this family found, and it just kept finding information on them. Someone had submitted information and had a huge file on the internet about this family. I was able to track them from the 1500s clear down to the present time, and had submitters' names, called information and got their phone number, and was able to contact them about this family, and we now communicate about genealogy.
This is what the internet has done for us. It's a learning tool, it's a meeting place, and it's this vast genealogical library just waiting to be explored.
The internet is a fantastic tool for genealogy, but understanding that it is a tool, we need to put it in perspective. What kind of tool is it? When should we use it? When can we have more efficient time in the library? When do we have more efficient time in an archives? When do we have more efficient time by talking to our relatives? When is a telephone much more efficient? You know, the internet is just a tool. It's not the only tool.
Just because someone has put some information on the internet doesn't make it true. When you find, if someone says, for example, that this ancestor was born in 1849 in Ohio, you should then try to find an original record that verifies that information. In the case of someone born in Ohio in 1849, we'd go to the 1850 census of Ohio and expect to find that person as a one-year-old child. If they aren't there, that would cause you to question the accuracy of the information the person gave you.
So I called my dad, a couple of older relatives and so forth. Nobody knew who Martha was. Who is this Martha? So I did write off for her Social Security application, but patience has never been my strong suit. So what I did is I noticed that she had died somewhere in the area of Nazareth, Pennsylvania. So I just found the area code for that part of Pennsylvania, and I picked up the phone and took advantage of the fact that I have an unusual name and just called information and said, give me any listings you have for Smolenyaks. And they had two, sure enough. So I called both these folks, and they were really helpful and very happy to hear from me. But on the second call, I was told, you know, you really need to talk to my brother Mike. He's the family historian.
About 6 years ago, I received a telephone call from my brother. He had said that he received a call from a Megan Smolenyak asking about Smolenyak people living in that area, in our area. He said I'd probably get a call from her. And I think it was around several days later that I did receive a call. And we started talking, started comparing notes, found that our families had come from the same village. Aunts and uncles all seemed to have the same names. You know, you had a John, a Michael, a George, this type of thing. And, you know, the more we talked, compared notes, the more we knew we had to be related somehow.
It didn't take any warming up with Mike at all. I think we were like two kids in a candy store. Because if you're an avid genealogist, there's no rush that's bigger than finding a playmate, a partner in crime, to find somebody who's as into your own family as you are. Because genealogy is fun by yourself, but it's just a lot more fun if you have playmates. It's exponentially more fun. So Mike and I sort of mounted a research blitzkrieg, if you will, because we compared notes, and in doing so we realized, hey, you know, there's more than just our two groups out here too.
That phone call kind of opened it up, because then I realized that there were other Smolenyaks out there. And in fact, that call, that was the first time that I had ever talked to a Smolenyak outside of my immediate family. After that, we started corresponding. Megan had a lot of information that I didn't have. I had some information that she needed. And I think that started it rolling.
We communicated mostly by phone initially, and there was a lot of letter writing back and forth and sending Xeroxes of our relatives, that kind of thing. But finally, after another year or so, Mike came online, and that was just wonderful.
It was just so much easier to send an email, maybe with an attachment, than constantly trying to make telephone calls.
I'm a big fan of instant gratification, so I love just being able to type out a message, send it off, and maybe an hour later having a response back to Mike, whereas in the old days it would have been snail mail. If I was lucky, I'd get an answer in a week, maybe more like 2, that kind of thing.
Email is electronic mail. It is one of the components of the internet. When you first open up your account with your internet service provider, you're usually given an email address. An email message, when you first open up a blank message, it looks a lot like a memo. You fill in the to box the email address of the person you want to send a message to. From is generally filled out already with your email address. And then subject is where you want to put in what the subject of your message is. And then in the body, you write it just like you do any other letter. Dear so-and-so, you want to be very complete and concise in the message that you write, and then you're going to sign it, sincerely, thank you, that kind of thing, with your name, your email address, your mailing address, if you want to include that.
Electronic mail allows you instant communication with people, and so if you find somebody that might be a relative, you send them an email, and sometimes you hit the jackpot with the information that you get back.
I signed on to an email listserver that is dedicated to Slovak heritage and culture and genealogy, and posted an inquiry about my family surname. And within an hour, I received 2 emails back. One saying I was your great-grandparents' next-door neighbor, and another saying I'm a distant relative, I'm not really sure how. They focused my research into one area of Slovakia. I sent over an email making an inquiry, and ultimately a pastor from a church wrote me back saying that my ancestors had worshipped at that church for 200-300 years. He sent me a family history. It was 200-300 years long, and that is compared to my father had done decades of research. I had done some research with no results, and within 6 months on the internet, we were able to find our family history.
So if you decide that you want to talk to other people who are doing research in a specific county or a specific country or on a specific topic, you go find a mailing list. A mailing list is in a lot of ways, it's like a genealogy society. And if you can imagine being able to talk to 600 people who are doing the same research in the same place that you are and talk to them day or night, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, that's what a mailing list is.
This is, they're a fairly recent couple. When Mike and I found each other and went on our research blitzkrieg, we started uncovering these other pockets of Smoleniaks around the country. And one by one, we started discovering that they were all from the same village. Mike's family was also from Osturna. Another pocket we found in Ohio, also from Osturna. And what we ultimately learned, much to our delight, is that literally every Smolenyak on the face of the earth came from this one tiny village, which is a genealogist's dream because it makes your research nice and tidy. You get to focus on one place, and also the chances of connecting everybody up are greatly amplified.
As you gather all this information on your ancestors, you need a place to store it, and compact discs offer an easy and convenient solution. The amazing thing about CDs is the amount of information they can store. For example, this disc can hold about 160,000 pages of text, equal to about 460 of these floppy disks. Compact discs are also ideal for keeping large text files and electronic images of your photographs.
You can include family pictures, your entire genealogy that you've gathered over dozens of years, lots of information that's tremendous use to your relatives. And since most computers these days have a CD-ROM, they can take the CD-ROM that you've burned or saved information on and put it in their computer and be looking at pictures and looking at your genealogy as soon as they get it from you.
My database in particular has gotten a little out of control because I have a tendency to scan in pictures, and so the databases get quite large after a while. Now it's just not practical to email. Most email systems won't handle that. So I now have a CD-ROM burner, and I will burn off copies of my database onto a CD-ROM and then send that to whoever wants it. Then they get all the data, plus they get copies of the marriage certificates, photos of what the people look like, all this extra information. So there's a lot of different ways you can play with genealogy and technology.
Most people that don't have a computer want to know, is this really for me? Is this something I should try out? Go to your local library and try their internet connection. Most public libraries do have that now. Or go to a friend's and try their computer and see, what's this all about? Visit a few genealogy sites and see if this is something that's for you. And I'm going to guarantee you're going to be addicted the second you see it, and you're going to want to go home and try it immediately.
We can exchange data more quickly. I can exchange, no matter what program I use, I can exchange family files as email attachments in seconds at very low or no cost. It's exciting times for genealogists. It's exciting because I think we can find more data, and I think it's exciting because those people who want to do good, solid research can use the internet to help them do that.
If there's one thing more exciting than connecting with people online, it's meeting them in person, especially when they're your relatives. And that's what Mike and Megan decided to do. Take the American Smoleniaks back to their ancestral village in Eastern Europe for a cultural exchange they'd never forget.
Mike and I kind of came up with a dream itinerary, because for many people this was going to be their first trip to Europe, maybe even their first trip on a plane. And so we worked with these people and orchestrated this trip that included some of the other cities, but included about 4 days in the village itself. Ultimately, we wound up with 37 Americans whose parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, or great-great-grandparents had come from Osturna, coming over on this trip, going back to the old country. About 10 of those people were actually children of immigrants and were meeting their first cousins for the first time. But it was just really wonderful to watch the people, and during the whole trip to see these people, particularly the children of immigrants, recognizing the old songs, recognizing the old dances, to see an 88-year-old gentleman dancing around, swirling around with a young Slovak woman, obviously reminiscing about when he was a teenager and stuff. Oh, it was just wonderful. And we also brought the mayor a set of many of the records from Osturna. He has access to them, but he has to go to 3 different archives. We had managed to secure copies of some of them here, and so we made one master set that we could give to him so that he wouldn't have to go running around the whole country to answer another American cousin's letter. So he was quite stunned when we gave him these stacks of paper, very surprised.
I think the internet has been one of the greatest boons to genealogists. So much is already there and available, and not just from America, but from all over the world.
I really think that the home computer was made for genealogy. It brings families back together. Not just families that knew one another, but families that haven't known one another.
With the computer technology of today, finding your ancestors has never been easier. Computers help you reach across the country, around the world, and into the past. And that's what it's all about, discovering your family and connecting with your ancestors.
When we went on the trip, one of the first people I met was, his formal name is Andrew Smolenyak, but we took to calling him First Class Andy. I discovered that he was the fellow who owned the Smoleniak's garage that had started me on this quest all these years ago. And in fact, because Mike had already told him the story, he brought a little keychain for me from the garage. And I have that. That's the first thing you see in my scrapbook from the trip, because that's what kept me looking for 22 years to find the other Smoleniaks.
Next time on Ancestors, we'll explore vital records.
To go from America, growing up here, born here, but knowing half of you is from Italy, and you go over there and you open a book and there is your family link on paper. It's in ink and it's certified and it's old and it's real. It's overwhelming. You cannot be the same.